Chapters 31 to 39 are a crucial section in the book of Ezekiel because it includes a transition in his mission from giving prophecies of doom to hope. The oracle in chapter 31 uses the metaphor of a cedar tree to describe the pride for being tall and reaching the heavens of a tree. It receives a judgment for this sin of pride, which results in its descent to Sheol, a place compared to hell. The cedar tree could either represent Assyria, which was conquered by Babylonians and was declining in power, or Egypt, which was conquered by Nebuchadnezzar. Just like trees that stand tall and are fruitful seem like they are full of glory and pride, the Pharaoh took pride in his power. God thus convicts Pharaoh, who considered himself godlike powerful. This pride is known as hubris. Chapter 32 continues with the oracle of destruction of Egypt. The destruction is described in fierce imagery of cosmological judgment of destruction of the land, animals, followed by their cleansing. The downfall of Egypt is described including the other nations that have spread terror around the world. Some of the places mentioned along with Assyria are Media, Elam, Meshech Tubal, Edom, Aram, and Egypt. Their destruction had led to large-scale massacre and the slain go to Sheol. The mention about the uncircumcised in this section refers to those other than the chosen people of Israel. The mission of Ezekiel changes in chapter 33 after the downfall of Jerusalem announced in this chapter. From being a prophet announcing judgment over the nations, Ezekiel shifts focus and becomes the prophet of hope. In chapters 33 to 39, there are seven oracles related to the purification of the land and restoration of the covenant people. This chapter also refers to Ezekiel having regained his speech, which he lost in chapter 24 after the death of his wife. The oracle in chapter 33 begins with enlisting the duties and responsibilities of a watchman and Ezekiel's role as a watchman to warn the covenant people against sin and its destructive power. His voice is compared to the sound of a trumpet that will be a sign of warning. God will hold him accountable for the people if he does not fulfill his role as a watchman. Then gives the opportunity of conversion by repentance of sins. God does not take pleasure in the spiritual death of his people, but delights in their turning back in repentance and conversion. However, if a righteous person falls into sin, he will be doomed. But if a sinner repents and starts living a righteous life, he will be saved and his past sins forgiven. While most of the people were deported to Babylon and other nations, few poor people were left behind to take care of it as vineyard workers and plowmen. They were of the opinion that God has blessed them with the inheritance of the promised land. But God clarifies that they will not possess the land due to their sins of idolatry, adultery, not following the law and blood prohibitions, where they shed innocent blood. The people acknowledged Ezekiel to be a true prophet because of all that he said after the destruction of Jerusalem. However, they did not practice or observe his warnings and went on living like before. Chapter 34 deals mainly with the imagery of shepherds. God will punish the bad shepherds for the wrong they do, and he will replace them with a good shepherd from the Davidic line, that is, with Jesus Christ. Zedekiah was the last king in the line of David to rule over the people. He was a bad shepherd. Some of the characteristics of the bad shepherd that are mentioned in this chapter are: they secured the economic advantage at the cost of the people. They failed to care for the poor, weak, and disadvantaged. They ruled the people without mercy, and they didn't care about God's people who were lost and separated. God will bless the people with a good shepherd who will protect and take care of them. The people will experience peace with animals, blessings of the vegetation of the land, and deliverance from enemies and oppression, courtesy the Good Shepherd. This chapter is one of the three important chapters in the Old Testament, along with Jeremiah 31 and Daniel 7, as it announces about the coming of the Davidic Messiah and inauguration of the new age in salvation history. The Davidic Messiah will bring a new eternal covenant and a new spirit. He will come as Yahweh himself, and he is a divine Messiah with the power and authority to judge all nations. In chapter 35, there's a prophecy against Edom. Edom, which was a part of the clan of Abraham, joined hands with Babylonians to destroy Israel. They even celebrated Israel's downfall, and hence God attacks and destroys Edom with bloodshed. The two main reasons for Edom's judgments were its jealousy and hatred towards Israel that motivated them to possess the northern and southern kingdom of the promised land, their disrespect to God. In chapter 36, Yahweh declares that he will not allow the neighboring countries to possess the promised land. Though the covenant people were sent to exile and displaced from their land because of their sins, God will restore them not because of their repentance but his initiative. Some of the promises that God makes to these people who are in exile are that the neighboring nations will have sufferings and insults to bear. The land will become fruitful again when the exiles return. The cities will be lived in again, and the ruins rebuilt, thus becoming populous. They will become more prosperous than before the exile, and the sins of the people committed will not be repeated henceforth. This chapter also includes a summary of Ezekiel's theology in relation to the renewing of the covenant people. Some of the important themes mentioned are: God will gather them from among the nations and return them to their land. God will pour clean water over them to spiritually cleanse them of their guilt and their contamination by false gods. God will give them a new heart and a new spirit. Their new heart will give them the spiritual strength they need to demonstrate their obedience to God's judgment and commandments. They will live in the land that is their ancestral heritage as God's covenant people. God will give them everything they need to prosper in the land, to include rebuilding and populating their cities. Christians see in this the foreshadowing of Christian baptism. The word Ruah, translated spirit, also means breath or wind. The Spirit of God, which creates and gives life, will come upon people to fill them with new life. The characteristic of the Messianic age is the extraordinary outpouring of the Spirit of God on all peoples. The Spirit gives them grace that includes a special inward renewal, making possible a faithful observance of God's commandment. Like life giving water that makes the earth fertile, God's spiritual cleansing will nourish the fruits of holiness, which will guarantee the favor and protection of God. The first recipient of this supernatural infusion of the Spirit will be the Davidic Messiah, who will have the spiritual power and authority to accomplish his saving work in the world. Chapter 37 is about Ezekiel's third vision experience. He sees a valley of dry bones that are brought to life with the command received from God. The dry bones are said to be of the people who were slaughtered at the hands of the Babylonians and did not receive a proper burial because of their sins. God instructs Ezekiel to summon the dry bones to attention and then commands the bones to be joined with sinews, the bones to be covered with flesh, the flesh to be covered with skin, and the breath to be put into them. These are the four reversal stages of decomposition. This symbolizes God restoring Israel with the help of its old people to form a new covenantal people. This also indicates resurrection of the dead that was experienced during the death of Jesus when the slain saints came back to life, as mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew. Another symbol of restoration given to Ezekiel was by using wooden sticks that are joined together to make one staff. This represents the unification of the northern kingdom of Israel and southern kingdom of Judah. Jeroboam, a descendant of Joseph, son of Jacob, from the tribe of Ephraim, founded the northern kingdom. Therefore, the oracle refers to the second stick as Joseph. This chapter also emphasizes on the rule of the Davidic Messiah, which will be eternal and will be displayed through the following occurrences. They will live in the land forever. The Davidic Messiah will be their ruler forever. God will make an eternal covenant of peace with them, and God will set his sanctuary among them forever. Chapters 38 and 39 mention of the prophecy that will occur in the future after the return of the exiles into the promised land. Gog and Magog will wage a war against the people of Israel, which will actually be a part of God's plan. God allows it, but also assures victory of his people. This is to show to the people of Israel and all the nations his might, his holiness, and acknowledgement of his divine person. God allows the defeat and exile of his chosen people as a just punishment for their sins. He, however, blesses them with the outpouring of his Spirit, thus renewing his people and spiritually restoring them to holiness in communion to their holy God. The prophecies of Ezekiel point out to the coming of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. No matter the sins we commit and go away from God, He loves us, forgives us, and also rescues us from the clutches of evil for His name's sake. Do we realize this magnanimous might and presence of God in our lives and act as responsible Christians in society?